And we're joined by Mr. Louis Wierenga. He's a lecturer in international relations at the Baltic Defence College. Welcome to TP World, sir.
Thank you for having me. It's always a pleasure.
Thank you. So, let's start off with a summary of Jens Stoltenberg's performance over the last 10 years. I mean, it's been a fairly taxing 10 years, wouldn't you say? How do you think he's performed overall?
Taxing is putting it mildly, that's for sure. I mean, Secretary Stoltenberg's tenure has been quite a busy one. He served several terms. His term has been prolonged. 4 years is the term limit for one term. And he's really overseen an alliance that's gone through some political turmoil with a previous United States administration, first really testing and stirring up the 2% of defense spending prior to the COVID pandemic. The pandemic, of course, changed a lot. And then, of course, with Russia's illegal and unjust war of aggression against Ukraine entering its second phase in 2022, that altered the European security architecture indefinitely. And that's one of the reasons why he stayed on. And I think that we have to commend Secretary Stoltenberg for that, because what he's done and what his successor, Mark Rutte, will have to do is consensus building, because it's no secret that the center of gravity of the alliance is the consensus of now 32 allied countries, which can be a taxing political job to get consensus on certain issues.
Right, and what about some of the failures, some of the criticism that Stoltenberg has faced?
I think that when you reach that level, of course, regardless of which political party, of course, the Secretary General is no longer attached to a political party because it's post-electoral politics. You're always going to face some of that, and there are times where certain people might say that you're being too hawkish or that you're being not hawkish enough. You might be, criticized for thinking too close to what your national country thinks, which I don't think that he actually did. I think he was very diplomatic in representing NATO and not representing European NATO, but really looking at the alliance as a transatlantic alliance. One of the things I also wanted to mention was his handling of the previous administration. And then with the current administration actually coming out and publicly pleading with President Biden to allow the Ukrainians to use the weapons that they were given by the United States and other allied countries in a way that they could strike targets inside the Russian Federation that were posing a threat to Ukrainian territory. Which sometimes can be a very politically tough call, depending on which politicians from which countries and which parties are looking at that, because that's not something, unfortunately, that all allied countries are agreeing on politically inside. And you see this now with his very subtle and diplomatic message to different member states about upcoming elections.
Right. So from what you're saying, Mr. Stoltenberg, or Secretary Stoltenberg, has actually done a pretty good job of balancing the various moving parts, especially with the United States, the major donor to NATO. How do you think Mark Rutte is going to fare on that front, especially if Donald Trump is re-elected?
Well, the optimistic side of me says very well. I mean, Mark Rutte has been a long-standing prime minister in the Netherlands, but of course, moving to Brussels to be the Secretary General of the Alliance during a time where there's a war on European, albeit not allied, soil, is going to be a test of anyone. And prior to the unanimous decision, there was sort of a regional, let's say, imbalance about who should be the next Secretary General. But of course, allies went with Mark Rutte, and that is largely because they had faith in him to continue his job at being a consensus builder. And I think when he went to Hungary and spoke with Prime Minister Orban, that was already a taste of what will come, because that was before he was confirmed, and his job will officially start on the 1st of October, and he'll be confirmed by the U.S. officially at the NATO summit in a couple of weeks. So the optimistic side of me says that this will be something that will not be smooth sailing, but it will be something that, given his track record at the helm of the Netherlands, he'll be very successful in doing. And I think the good news is that he has enough allies behind him who want to see the alliance succeed. They've gotten over the sort of political conversation about who it's going to be. We know it's going to be Mark Rutte for 4 years at least, if his term is not extended. And I think that right now allies understand that cohesion is really our center of gravity, and we have to move forward. That said, it's not going to be an easy time. We see what's going on in terms of European elections. France will have an election coming up that could be potentially, if not polarizing, that could have a ripple effect across the alliance. And of course, there's the election in Washington in November. Now, you asked about Trump. I think, if we look at Secretary Stoltenberg, Mark Rutte is a very similar personality, and I don't think that was any coincidence, considering that allies are going to brace for a Trump presidency, because there's a good chance it could be him, also a good chance it could be Biden returning to the White House. And that will require somebody who is able to diplomatically discuss with the personality. I think a lot of people may recall Secretary Stoltenberg sitting down with President Trump, and I believe it was 2019, prior to the COVID-19 pandemic, where President Trump was berating allies for not paying their fair share. And Secretary Stoltenberg explained very calmly and very collectively how the alliance operates to President Trump. And a lot of this will likely be signaling back home to the voter base to keep that going after the next American election, when President Trump, if reelected, hands the torch to a Republican successor. So I think there's a lot of interesting things to watch.
Right. This is why Mark Rutte has been called Trump whisperer, right? Because he managed to get him on board. He also managed to get Hungary on board now, as you rightly pointed out. But I mean, he has made some concessions, right, towards Hungary when it comes to their involvement in the war in Ukraine. So do you think that he will make more concessions during his term in office?
Perhaps. I would say 60-40 leaning towards no, but not ruling out that possibility. It's a very delicate line to tread. On the one hand, you never want to give the impression that not all allies are on board. On the other hand, if you have one that seeks a political solution with some concessions, at the end of the day, the number one thing to take into consideration is the security of Allied territory, especially considering the vulnerability of NATO's northeastern flank and how unpredictable Putin is.
That's right. Louis Wierenga, thank you, sir, for being with us this evening. Much appreciated.
My pleasure.